Esteemed colleagues, good afternoon. We're going to continue our working day, and I'll give the floor to Maria Ionova, MP, Deputy Head of the Parliamentary Committee on the Issues of European Integration, member of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, and Minister Artur Gerasimov, MP, and Gerasimov, it's also MP from the Bloc, Poroshenko Bloc. Last week there was a delegation of the European Parliament to Ukraine, and now our parliamentarians, our deputies, are going to tell you about their visits, where they went to, and the further cooperation steps in this regard. Thank you.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues, journalists. I want to tell you that together with the European parliamentarians, we went to Mariupol, we went to Shirokino, and also to Volnovakha. There were a lot of meetings. They were rather diverse, with activists, with volunteers, students, and military, so that our European colleagues have a full picture of what's happening in the east of Ukraine. And also want to note that after their visit to the zone of the anti-terrorist operation, our colleagues said that the European Union should acquire a stricter and more consistent policy as far as the pressure on the Russian Federation is concerned to fulfill the Minsk agreements. They promised to raise this issue in the European Parliament, and also they will pressure the governments of their countries. Allow me to remind you of the official position of Ukraine about the peaceful settlement in the east. The political settlement can begin only when the preliminary conditions are fulfilled. This is the ceasefire and the withdrawal of heavy armaments from the front line, the withdrawal of all the foreign troops from the territory of Ukraine, the restoration of Ukrainian control over the Ukrainian-Russian border, and the holding of elections according to the Ukrainian legislation and under the international monitoring, which concerns the OSCE standards. Also, President Poroshenko has initiated the invitation to peacekeepers, international peacekeepers into Ukraine, and it was confirmed and approved by the parliament. We do need the broadening of the presence of international monitors and in the east of Ukraine. This has to be either the expansion of the existing OSCE mission or the policy mission of the UN. MEPs will talk about this in the European Parliament until Ukraine can control its own territory. They also saw that weapons are freely transported into Ukraine from the Russian Federation. They were shown some samples of projectiles, and they also saw that there are Russian mercenaries and officers. We know that our military have detained 2 Russian reconnaissance personnel in Luhansk region, and they are now testifying to the fact of the presence of whole units of Russian troops in Donbass. We will discuss the presence of foreign troops in the east, and we shall show that Russia is the third party to the conflict, and they have also fulfill conditions of the Minsk agreements. Artur Gerasimov. Dear colleagues, dear journalists, on the 16th of May, Artur Gerasimov, Andrei Lopushansky, Maria Ionova, Andrei Lubinets, and the MEPs, and I want to draw your attention that they represent different countries and various political groups and different political affiliations. We have visited the anti-terrorist operation zone. There were Belgian, Luxembourg, Estonian, and Czech MEPs within the delegation, and the delegation was headed by a co-head of informal group in the European Parliament, Friends of European Ukraine, Petro, and we went to Mariupol and Volnovakha. The main aim why the MEPs went to this rather dangerous zone was to see with their own eyes what was happening, because it's no secret that Russia is applying efforts to distort the picture of what's going on in the east of Ukraine and in Crimea. And they wanted to see whether there's really ceasefire there, and whether there are or there are no ruinations, because Russia says that they don't ruin anything, they do not shell Ukrainian cities, and you know, they were shocked every time they went to a new city. In Shirokino, we talked to representatives of Battalion 37 and Battalion Donbass. I'd like to draw your attention that Shirokino is a example of very good coordination between Armed Forces of Ukraine and volunteer battalions and units of Armed Forces of Ukraine from different units and brigades and battalions. The situation in Shirokino is very complicated, and just an hour before we went there, there was a shelling from mortars. European MPs, and I draw your attention to this, said that a well-trained military are shelling our positions. Mark Demoskaker is a very experienced person. He's an MEP now, but before that he used to be a correspondent in hotspots all over the world, and he reported for many publications. When he saw how the 152-millimeter projectiles are exploding, he said, this is done by professional military, because an untrained person cannot do this, and because you need a lot of training for this. So they are sure that these are well-trained military that are doing this, not some militia, as Russian Federation says. In June, when the next Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe happens, we shall talk not about the removal of sanctions from the Russian Federation, but about strengthening those sanctions. Let's see whether they fulfill any of their promises, and you'll see that those are few. The situation in Shirokino, and we share the position of the President of Ukraine, which he expressed in particular while talking to Angela Merkel, in 10 hottest spots of confrontation, there should be representatives of the special monitoring mission of OSCE. The situation when they come there from time to time is inadmissible, and we've seen with our own eyes the inefficiency of this situation. There's, for instance, a shelling, and the cars of OSCE are somewhere else, and they can visit this place only in an hour or 90 minutes. So we do hope, and we do support the point of view that they should be there constantly. It was very pleasant to see the mood of residents of Mariupol, because we went to several families that suffered during the shelling of Schidny residential areas in January this year, and everyone understands very clearly where from the rockets came, and they do understand who did this, and the level of support for Ukraine has risen significantly. Dmitry Levinsky.
Good afternoon, esteemed journalist. Donetsk region, Petro Poroshenko Bloc. First of all, I would like to say that Shirokino, like Granitny Chermolenko, belong to my majority actual district, and I was really pleased that 5 MPs of Europe and my colleagues from the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine actually visited that specific, let's say, populated area, despite the fact that there is a very serious situation around there. when we were coming there, we realized that maybe not everything would end in a very positive way, but the major goal and objective of this visit, both to us and to our European colleagues, to see with our own eyes and make sure that the Minsk agreements, unfortunately, on the part of the terrorists, are not observed, and there was some shooting and shelling and bombardment using the 152mm mortar launchers and the self-propelled artillery launchers, and we saw the fortification where the guys showed to us, the holes there. Let's see, this is 120mm shell which actually damaged the concrete, and it completely actually ruins the concrete slab, the huge hole in that. And I mean, this is a very dense shelling, maybe about 30 holes on the very small territory. And even not only the military guys who accompanied us, but European parliamentarians, as my colleagues already said, it was absolutely clear. You have to be very well trained there for a long time to do that. I mean, to shoot with such precision. And we are talking about really professional military guys after well-trained guys, And after that, we visited the Sydney micro-district in the city of Mariupol. And when we moved to Volnovakha, this is the first area where I invited European deputies, MPs, my colleagues. This is the spot where the terrorists actually shelled or bombarded the peaceful bus, and we had a kind of peaceful rally after that, and there was a kind of direct connection between the two events. Both actually actions had as their objectives to intimidate the civilians during the days off, during the weekend, when the people, most of them, actually go into the street just to visit, the public places. There were no military men. There was no contact line, whatever. Only civilians. And this action, both in Volnovakha, you were talking about this bombardment of the bus, peaceful bus, and the Sydney district in Mariupol, it had as its aim to intimidate the local citizens. This is definitely a terrorist action. I would like to thank the Danish Benevolent Foundation, owing to Maria Ionova and Gerasimov, both of them MPs. They managed to get some assistance from this foundation, and part of this assistance was given a channel to the central hospital, the city of Volnovakha. Also, I would like to thank our colleague who was also with us, Andrei Lopushansky. Unfortunately, he could not make it here today. He actually came with the assistance from his the foundation from Lviv, Jesui Volnovakha. Actually, this assistance was meant for the poor people, those who suffered as a result of bombardment, a lot of different foodstuffs, etc., etc. In the major emphasis, we agreed to do that. I mean, it was placed focused on education of the children, and we are working on the first program or curriculum when the people from the Azov Sea area are going to spend their vacations in the Lviv region. I believe this is the most important because it is the children who, with their own eyes, to give them a chance from the eastern parts of Ukraine, children, to see with their own eyes the attitude towards them, how there is no problem with the Russian language or Russian-speaking population there, and they are given a lot of presents and gifts, and they actually changed drastically their mentality, and after which no Russian propaganda can affect those people any longer. I would like to draw attention to the following fact. After this visit, all the European parliamentarians were unanimous in their opinion that we have to actually to make the sanctions even more strict against the Russian Federation and increase the assistance given to Ukraine. It's high time to switch over to the discussion of absolutely new mission with other authorities, because the OSCE delegation, not always, and sometimes even they cannot cope with their mission there. And it's time to do something about that. As a people's deputy who actually received the assistance from the Denmark, the Danish people, and the Lviv people, I would like to thank all those people who live, all those people who actually help us to survive there. I'm sorry, I would like to add a few words regarding the humanitarian aid. We discussed with our colleagues from the European Parliament. There are a lot of different issues related to the, let's say, the financial, humanitarian, medical assistance. And when they saw those central or district hospitals in which situation they find themselves, and the city is at the front line and how the local population suffers, they came to understand that the humanitarian assistance must be increased in order to help to renovate or to equip those hospitals with the new medical equipment. Thank you. If there are any questions, we will be ready to answer those, please. Christian Chmakina, Ukrainian Crisis Media Center. Have you discussed the possibility about the preparation toward the forthcoming Riga summit? And if yes, what specific issues you discussed? You know, we were more asked students put more questions. We also discussed with them the visa-free regime. They have the unanimous position that the Riga summit has to give the answer to Ukraine regarding the specific date when the visa-free regime is going to be realized. They say that the war cannot be regarded as the reason why not to provide such a regime to Ukraine. Technically, Ukraine has to take care of some of the technical issues regarding some of the criteria, and then Ukraine must be given this visa-free regime as soon as possible. What is interesting, I repeat myself, that most of those questions came from the students. And some of those students have this kind of European curricular programs, and some of the deputies actually informed the students about such educational programs, and they were told that visa-free regime doesn't mean that the Ukrainians have to leave the country. We are talking about the free movement, free choice of education, free choice of choosing, let's say, the educational curriculum. So this regime is going to be kind of facilitated, you know, all those things. They were told that this will happen in the nearest possible time. And your task, the parliamentarians said to the students to study now. And some issues were associated with some specific kinds of the assistance from Europe. And your parliamentarians actually became sure that they had to more communicate with students and to tell them more about the advantages of the European integration to the European Union, both economic, cultural, ideological. In fact, they saw that that region lacks the positive information, and they still live in some kind of stereotypes, and they have a lot of work to do in this specific, to this end, I mean. You know, I would like to add only one sentence, one phrase voiced by Frank England, one of those MP of European Parliament, which is actually summed up what they saw. In Shirokin and Mariupol and Volnovakh, he said, we said some things which, according to the statement of the Russian Federation, allegedly do not exist, but they do exist, and we saw that with our own eyes, and we have to do everything possible to stop it and never happen again in the future. Thank you. I have another, maybe not so much the question, the specification. You actually demonstrated to the 5 people from Europe what is going on there, in fact, in Mariupol and Shirokin, all those places and bombardments. Is this a critical mass, or we are going to constantly once every month organize such kind of tours? Is it very difficult to organize such tours, trips for the European parliamentarians, for them to persuade their respective citizens in their respective countries to do something in order to make it, to have this some effect? I must say that the circle of our friends in the European Parliament increases day in, day out. For example, Petro had the list of the one of the Lords member of the Great Britain parliamentarians, and we do this work. Maybe this is not so much public, but then the circle of our friends increases because they are doing something in their respective organizations. We also communicate with the core diplomatique. We try to persuade them that they do not have to visit the contact line, but they have to go out to the regions to talk to the people, to see with their own eyes how the IDPs live. If all of us, we are going to exert all of our efforts, I believe that this means that Ukraine is going to win. Why? Because the truth is in the Ukrainian side, and our European friends, not only European friends, there are a lot of people from the United States and Canada who visit those places, and we see after the Canadians visit, we can see how this kind of assistance increased drastically. So I believe there is a lot of work which is going on now. Maybe the results will come later, but this kind of work is very important now, because in our part, whatever meetings we have with our international colleagues, we are going to tell them what's going on in this east of Ukraine all the time. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your work in the diplomatic, so to say, sphere. Thank you very much. Our next briefing will start in 3 minutes.